Imagine the Earth's atmosphere, also known as the ionosphere, as a thick soap bubble. It is a membrane, a natural electrically charged shield around the Earth, protecting all life from deadly solar radiation.
We have to have the atmosphere for survival. I don't think we should do anything to damage it.
Without the ionosphere, I'd be fried, you'd be fried, all life on Earth would be fried.
In 1912, Nikola Tesla, a visionary genius, saw ways to tame the sky, to make the atmosphere glow. He developed alternating current, high-frequency radio technology, and free energy. He experimented with both high and low frequencies and electromagnetic waves. He envisioned altering the weather and creating shields around the Earth to protect us from missiles, and he claimed he knew how to split the Earth in two. In 1985, Bernard Eastlund applied for patents that could make some of these ideas real. Many claim that these patents have become the blueprint for HAARP, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program.
ARCO originally approached me in 1984 to find a use for the natural gas on the North Slope of Alaska, which they could not sell. To give you a feel for how much gas they asked me to find an application for, it was enough gas to produce all the electricity in the United States for a full year. I originated some ideas for military applications and beneficial civilian applications in which that gas would be converted into electricity and then used to power some gigantic antennas.
What does HAARP do? HAARP is a large antenna where we beam radio frequency energy up into the upper atmosphere, and we create on a small scale what the sun normally does. And the reason we're trying to do this is because when you have disturbances in the ionosphere, we can't communicate with our satellites.
HAARP began with a congressional insertion in the appropriations bill of fiscal year 1990. In essence, Congress directed the Defense Department to explore the potential for using the auroral regions for improving communications and navigation and surveillance. From there, the assignment came that the Navy and the Air Force were to manage the program. It is people from those two organizations that have worked together for the past 7 years.
Applications discussed in the patents included destroying missiles. Communications control and disruption were included. There were some other ideas both to possibly modify weather and finally to lift a portion of the upper atmosphere further out into space where hopefully it would be able to deflect missile trajectories.
What we do by beaming up radio frequency up into the ionosphere, that radio frequency, when it hits molecules of atmosphere, it tends to make the subatomic particles inside move faster, and that increases their temperature. So you can bring their temperature up to 1,600 degrees or so, which is normally what the sun does to those particles at that atmosphere.
The ionosphere of the Earth has got enormous amount of energy. There are 8,000 thunderstorms going on all over the Earth at any given moment. There are millions of amperes of electricity pouring to the Earth from lightning strikes, and HAARP could create a trigger effect.
In 1983, I did radio tomography with 30 watts, looking for oil in the ground. I found 26 oil wells over a 9-state area, and 100% of the time was accurate with just 30 watts of power beaming straight into solid rock. HAARP uses 1 billion watts beamed straight into the ionosphere for experiments. Picture these strings on the piano as layers of the Earth. Each one has its own frequency. What we used to do is beam radio waves into the ground, and it would vibrate any strings that were present in the ground. We might get a sound back like, and we'd say, that's natural gas. We might get a sound back like, and we'd say, that's crude oil. We were able to identify each frequency We accomplished this with just 30 watts of radio power. If you do this with 2 billion watts, the vibrations are so violent that the entire piano would shake. In fact, the whole house would shake. In fact, the vibrations could be so severe underground that could even cause an earthquake.
While we feel that HAARP is a unique facility, it's not the only one like it in the world. HAARP has some capabilities that we feel are better than some of the others. You can change the frequencies. You can shift the beam so that you can move it from one part of the ionosphere to another, and it has quite a bit more power than some of the other facilities throughout the world that are doing the same kinds of research.
I chose what's called a phased array antenna for the patents because it can be aimed. Picture holding your microwave oven in your hands with the door open. Then you can move it around and send those microwaves different directions. And for these applications where I wanted precise control of where the power was, I felt that was the best type of antenna to use. And that is the kind that HAARP has built.
What we can do with an antenna is change the portion of the sky into which we insert the energy.
HAARP can create some of the effects that the sun creates that are similar to the aurora borealis.
HAARP can paint designs in the sky, if you will. You know, it can take the beam and move it in any pattern that the scientist who's doing the experiment might want to do.
What I'm holding in my hands is an electrodeless lamp. In it, I have a low atmosphere gas, somewhat similar to the atmosphere above the Earth. I'm now going to put this in the microwave oven, which will irradiate it with about 1 watt per square centimeter.
You know, you put 1 watt out and you've got the field necessary to break down the air, or whatever happens.
And you see all of the motion of the plasma. That's typical of what will happen at high altitude when the ionosphere gets irradiated with these big beams.
That was 1 watt per centimeter. HAARP focuses 3.6 million watts and squeezes it into a billion-watt or gigawatt beam.
We're squeezing the megawatts into a narrow beam. Then in a very tiny area, you can create what's it called, an effective gigawatt.
Is HAARP safe? Yes, HAARP is safe.
The Earth is a web of interconnections. How do we know what we're doing when we blast the upper atmosphere with a huge amount of energy?
It takes a tiny, tiny amount of energy to release a huge amount of energy. It's the same as a bullet, for example. If you have the primer on the back of a bullet, and that primer releases a tiny amount of energy, but it triggers the larger power in the bullet itself. And HAARP is playing with the energy system of the Earth.
In the HAARP program, we have, I believe right now, 18 different colleges and universities that are working the program with us. University scientists are interested because they're studying science, and this is a major effect on the Earth, and so they want to know more about what it is and what it does.
HAARP has no effect on the Earth.
HAARP began in the 1980s, and we were just beginning to learn about chaos theory, how a tiny stimulus can change the dynamics of a living system like the human body or the whole living Earth. I don't think the people who developed HAARP were even aware of that science or its impact in the life sciences. Today, our knowledge is much bigger about how tiny effects can drastically shift the health or well-being of a living thing.
It is possible with a big beam to take a part of that upper atmosphere and push it out for it.
What they're not paying any attention to is what's happening to the ionosphere while it's being held 80 miles out into space by this high-energy beam. It's heating up. And all of the molecules in that ionosphere region are absorbing energy out of that radio beam. And if they pick the right frequency to push that plume out into space, that energy may discharge back out of the ionosphere, back down the radio beam, and strike the Earth. And it would be about 100 times the energy released out of a thunderbolt. And that's how much energy would be released.
in certain applications, the military acknowledges that it can literally lift the ionosphere. And what they say is, it's not a problem, it's a short period of time, yet when you lift the ionosphere up, the lower atmosphere rushes in and fills that void, which changes localized weather patterns.
The Los Angeles Times on April 21st, you said that you told the Associated Press that the American government has created weather tampering techniques so that the New World Order will be able to starve millions of Americans and to control the rest. Would you explain what you were trying to say?
Well, what I was trying to say is exactly what I said. There is weather control techniques. We have a complete package on that, which I did not bring, but I certainly will see to it that it is brought in for the record. Number one, the entire patents on the equipment. Number two, Senator Claiborne Pell's complete statement and story of his own that not only does it exist, but that we even utilize it as far back as the Vietnam War. You might want to touch base with Senator Pell.
And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast which had the wound by a sword and did live. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And this second beast of Revelation chapter 13 is none other than the United States of America.
My name is Benjamin Fulford. I used to be the Asia Pacific Bureau Chief for Forbes magazine. My involvement with the secret government started this spring when I interviewed former Finance Minister Heizo Takenaka.
Dragon's Den.
I confronted him with evidence that he had sold out the Japanese financial system to a group of financial companies controlled by David Rockefeller and Rothschilds. The very next day, I got an email from someone who said he was introduced by Mr. Takenaka and he wanted to meet somebody. The person I met gave me this Freemason badge, and he said to me that he was a professional assassin and that I could either stop exposing people, or no, he said I could either continue exposing people and die at the age of 46, or I could become basically finance minister of Japan. Now I have all this proof on tape and video. This is apparently what happens to a lot of people on this planet. They get to a certain level and they're told either you join us or you die. And most of them join them, and that way they get the elite in their pocket. And that's the secret of their control. In my case, I would have probably had to do that too. Although, once I realized I had met an honest, genuine, high-level Freemason who told me there were 13 levels of Freemason above the 33rd degree, and that these people were God. There was no God, they were God. So I asked them about their plans to kill people, and they said, yes, there are too many people on the planet. We need to get rid of several billion. And war doesn't seem to work, so we're going to use disease and starvation. Now, I don't know about you, but I couldn't live with something like that. And my first thought was I'll have to pretend to join them and try to, throw them over from the inside. And I suspect a lot of the people inside those groups have the same feeling. They hate being there, but they're scared. But they'd love it if these guys were overthrown. So you got to remember, not everybody in the secret government is evil. In fact, I'd be willing to bet a majority actually want to do good things for the planet, but they're scared. The very next day after I got this threat and offer of a bribe from the ninja, well, the guy who described himself as a ninja, a Chinese secret society contacted me. It's actually an Asian secret society. It's not Chinese. It's Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese. It's all of Asia. And they offered me protection. And this is their booklet. One of them. This is the booklet of the other. Now, people who know will know this is real. They have 6 million members. More, actually. Including 1.8 million gangsters and a lot of very intellectual people. They can mobilize all public opinion in Asia. So, with their protection, I continued exposing David Rockefeller. And earlier this year, I issued an ultimatum on rents.com. The answer to the ultimatum was that the self-described assassin told me there would be an earthquake in Niigata Prefecture, Japan. And 2 days later, there were, on 2 consecutive days, earthquakes right on top of Japan's largest nuclear power plant. And I'll try to present this to people in the future. There was video taken of a ball of plasma in the atmosphere above Niigata on that day. His answer was to hit a nuclear power plant with an earthquake machine and kill innocent people. Last year, I confronted Heizo Takenaka, the former Japanese finance minister, over why he handed over control of the Japanese financial system to a group of American and European oligarchs. He and his envoy told me that it was because Japan had been threatened by an earthquake machine. I did not believe it at the time. However, when I started exposing some of their doings, I was told by the Japanese security police that because of what I had said on places like Rents.com, that Niigata City was going to be hit by an earthquake. 2 days later, Japan's largest nuclear reactor was the exact epicenter of 2 earthquakes, both 6.8 in magnitude. That was too much of a coincidence for me. So I started doing research and found out about HAARP, H-A-A-R-P. And I realized that they really did know how to make earthquakes. And they do it by shooting a 1 billion watt microwave into the ionosphere, which is the part of the atmosphere that has a lot of energy in it. That pushes the ionosphere up into outer space, and then it rebounds. And the way it rebounds can cause earthquakes. Just like an opera singer can break a glass by singing at a certain level, or by dragging your fingernails on a blackboard, you feel a weird sensation. If they adjust the vibration for the rock underneath their target site, they can do that. The same machine can also heat up subterranean water to cause earthquakes. And remember, a 1 billion watt microwave. What does microwave do to water? It heats it up. Now imagine if you put 1 billion watts into a tropical storm. You could make it much bigger, and you could change the direction it flows in. You know how there's high pressure zones and low pressure zones. Well, high is hot and low is cold. And the hot flows into the cold. And vice versa when there's more of the cold. So they can heat up an area and cause it to flow into a next door area. In other words, these people are capable of creating the cyclone that hit Myanmar, the tsunami that hit Indonesia, and the earthquake that hit China. Now, after the earthquakes hit Niigata, a member of the Inagawa crime family, which is based in around the U.S. Yokosuka Air Base, and members of the Inagawa family have told me that their big boss is George Bush Sr. In other words, they work for Skull and Bones. And they invited me to a so-called UFO gathering where they showed me the video of this blob. They told me it was a UFO, but it was obviously, to me anyway, a plasma weapon, or a ball of heat created by something like a 1 billion watt microwave. And I predicted in my blog that there would be videos of lights found above China before the earthquake. And those videos then appeared on the internet after I predicted they would. And furthermore, a Taiwanese satellite detected a 50% drop in the ionosphere, in the amount of electric energy in the ionosphere above the earthquake zone. Now, a 50% drop would be exactly what would happen with HAARP. It would push the ionosphere up, and then it would slam back down. So, it looks like the insane criminals who have taken over the U.S. government are killing people and threatening people with earthquake weapons. It doesn't look like it. I actually have some of the proof. And I want to ask the governments of China and Russia and Japan to reveal to the world everything they know about these weapons and the use by the American forces. I would also like to ask the loyal Americans and the patriotic Americans in the Air Force to please bomb the power generator of the HAARP stations in Greenland and Alaska so they can stop this mass murder. They've already killed 500,000 people. If we find out that the tsunami in Indonesia was caused by them, and there's a good chance because the earthquakes seem to be politically timed. They asked the Indonesian government to open the Straits of Malacca and to join in the fight against terrorism, and they refused. What happened? There was a tsunami, and suddenly they cooperated. In Myanmar, they are about to have an election, and immediately before the election it came. And guess what? Just conveniently, the U.S., British, and French navies are standing by with food supplies. It should take a couple of weeks to get there. What were they doing there already? And China had just succeeded in getting India to join with Russia and Brazil and other countries to join the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement or to cooperate with it. And Japan just had a very, very friendly summit meeting with China where the emperor met the Chinese leader 3 times. President Bush has not met the Japanese emperor in 8 years. Okay? So in other words, the United States is becoming isolated. And instead of being the policeman of the world, they have become the criminal of the world, the gangster of the world, the bully of the world. They have been taken over by madmen. And they have to be stopped. But we must not give them any excuse to convince the Western public to support a World War III. That's what they want, and they're not going to get it.
Attention everyone, this is an emergency broadcast. The unpleasant noise you are about to hear coming from your radio is not a mistake. Please do not turn off your radio, but turn up the volume on your receiver as high as it can go, so that you can make the sound we broadcast as loud as possible.
About this apparent disagreement between the U.S. and the Japanese, let's look at what the head of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission said today to Congress about one of those Fukushima reactors.
We believe that secondary containment has been destroyed, and there is no water in the spent fuel pool. And we believe that radiation levels are extremely high.
In other words, the Americans saying that it's worse than Japanese officials have let on. All of this leads us to our chief environmental affairs correspondent, Ann Thompson. Ann, we thought something was up when the Americans wanted their people further away from it than the Japanese standard earlier today. What's behind this apparent disagreement?
Well, Brian, it's a crisis in the confidence of the information they are getting from the Japanese government. In fact, tonight, Tokyo Electric Power Company is denying that spent fuel pool is indeed dry. It says that everything is stable at Reactor 4, and you have the head of public affairs for the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, who's trying to walk back some of Mr. Jasko's comments today, saying that they understand the Japanese are denying that there is a problem at Reactor 4. They're trying to run that to ground, but what he's saying is they are erring on the side of caution. They're trying to be very conservative because this is a very serious situation.
Fukushima's governor has urged the Japanese central government to offer more accurate and truthful information on the radiation leak affecting the country's citizens. Governor Yuhei Sato made the remarks on Wednesday at a meeting with crisis officials and specialists in Fukushima City. The city is about 60 kilometers inland from the nuclear plant. In a makeshift command center there, hundreds of Japanese government workers, police officers, as well as others aiding rescue operations are struggling to stay on top of the devastation caused by the quake and tsunami and the looming nuclear crisis. The prefecture's governor said transparency of information is one of the key issues in the government's dealing of the disaster.
I have made an urgent request to Prime Minister Kan. The government must give people in Japan accurate and truthful information on the radiation leakage.
Japan's Prime Minister has addressed the nation as fears intensify about a possible nuclear meltdown at a power plant struck by last Friday's catastrophic earthquake and tsunami. The company running the Fukushima nuclear power plant has admitted meltdown is a possibility following 2 fresh explosions at the complex, and there are also fears of radioactive leakage with reports of damage to the structure protecting the reactor. And now we can go live to Japan, and our correspondent Ivor Bennett is there for us. Hello there, Ivor. So radiation levels have risen both inside and outside the plant. How bad is the situation, and what's the risk of nuclear disaster now, and what's being done to try and prevent it?
The situation now is very critical indeed. There's a very realistic threat of a nuclear meltdown now. That's according to the Prime Minister Naoto Kan. He's just come out and addressed the nation, warning people to stay indoors if they haven't been evacuated already. This follows 2 explosions this morning. The last one, previously intact reactors. The second one, actually, one reactor that wasn't even turned on. It had been shut down at the time of the earthquake, and we now could be on the verge of a major nuclear catastrophe. We know radiation has leaked there have been serious radiation leaks at both reactors. The radiation levels are 400 maximum level that's normally absorbed in 1 year. Previously, after the first explosion this morning, those levels were at 8 times. So just in the last few moments, they've shot up. And it is a very critical situation indeed. And this is the first time, actually, that the Tokyo Electric Power Company and the Prime Minister have come out to say that we could be on the verge of a catastrophe here. And there is major very realistic possibility of meltdown. So this is very significant indeed, and the situation is critical.
In secret, ladies and gentlemen, they are at least, very bare minimum, 50 to 100 years ahead, beyond what you can even imagine.
Trembling, and the rocks are falling down in Sumner, just outside Christchurch. This giant rock has just fallen on the RSA building, and you can see it's crushed the building there, and the cars.
Hi, and you're now with the Forerunner Chronicles. All right, everybody, so if you haven't been watching closely the whole situation that is currently unfolding in Japan, I'm talking about the whole catastrophic nature of the meltdown at Fukushima. then whatever you're doing right now, you need to stop that and take a look at what I'm about to show you, because it is absolutely out of control right now. And there may be more to it than what they're telling us on the news. Take a look.
Tokyo has announced plans to dump nearly 12,000 tons of radioactive water from the Fukushima plant.
Is it really as harmless as the government is making out?
Absolutely not, and any other normal circumstances, the release of such volumes of water would be described as catastrophic.
There's no concept how to store the radioactive fuel. Plutonium, if it is ingested by a human body, almost certainly leads to the development of cancer. Plutonium is a very, very dangerous and harmful substance which will radiate for many, many, many thousands of years.
Unsuccessfully trying to restore the cooling system at the facility in what is now the worst atomic crisis since Chernobyl.
Plutonium, if it is ingested by a human body, almost certainly leads to the development of cancer.
Ladies and gentlemen, what I've just shown you is simply a brief synopsis of the horrific horror show that is currently gripping the hearts of every resident that lives within Japan at this time. And now with them dumping tens of thousands of tons of radioactive matter, highly radioactive matter, into the Pacific Ocean, this situation is no longer one that is solely isolated to Japan alone. This situation is getting ready to impact the lives of tens of millions of individuals all throughout the world. People are getting ready to come down with unexplainable, incurable health conditions, and it will be unbeknownst to themselves how this whole thing has come upon them. One day, their health was good. 3 days later, they're laid up in the hospital suffering from some deadly illness, and they will be oblivious as to how their health went south. And the reason why they'll be oblivious is because currently these individuals have been duped into listening to the peace and safety insidious rhetoric of the politicians and the scientists that are coming on the television set day in and day out, feeding us the same thing. There's nothing to worry about. This won't affect the environment. This won't affect your health. How can we listen to such lies and deception, such nonsense as this? Ladies and gentlemen, life can change in a moment's notice. Just look at what is happening in Japan at this time. This is a first world country we're talking about. One day, they're on the top of the pile. The very next day, they are scrambling feverishly, seeking for a means to stabilize their society, all without warning. But does this mean that the whole situation that is now underway in Japan was not planned? Is it possible that the tsunami that hit Japan, causing catastrophic damage to the Fukushima nuclear plant, was something that was engineered and brought about by a device called HAARP? If you're not familiar with what HAARP is,
HAARP, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program.
It is a field of antennas on the ground in southeastern Alaska, so linked together as to work as one giant antenna. It's 360 antennas. Each can generate 10,000 watts, 3.6 million watts collectively. The largest legal AM radio station in the U.S. is only 50,000 watts. But they're not broadcasting out. They're broadcasting up.
When HAARP is fired up, all those antennas shoot powerful radio waves into the ionosphere, the uppermost part of the atmosphere. They literally heat it. They create irregularities that allow the ionosphere to bounce powerful radio signals back to Earth.
And when that high-powered beam returns back down to Earth, it not only has the ability to change the weather, and if you thought you didn't hear me right, you heard me right. HAARP has the ability to control the weather. But that high-powered beam that is shot up into the ionosphere by this mechanism also has the power to cause earthquakes. And earthquakes, we know, are the cause behind tsunamis. Now, when this beam is fired off from HAARP, it causes these erratic, radical patterns in the clouds of the sky, like the following images that I'm showing on the screen at this time. Now, I want you to compare those images that I just showed to you with the following video footage, because what I'm about to show you is actual video of Japan's sky just prior to the tsunami that hit on March the 11th, or should I say on 3/11. Now, after observing that video footage, it's pretty clear to see that the abnormal cloud patterns that were present in the skies above Japan just prior to the tsunami that hit on March the 11th are exactly the same as the peculiar cloud patterns that are produced by the powerful antennas of HAARP. But if that's true, could it also possibly be true that the government of the United States of America is responsible for creating the massive cataclysmic tsunami that hit the shores of Japan, bringing absolute destruction to everything in its path and turning their reality into a living nightmare? Could something like that be possible? How could the government of the United States of America be responsible for perpetrating such a heinous criminal act as this against Japan? I mean, before we start accusing people, there has to be seen a very clear-cut motive as to why this type of evasive action would be carried out. Some extremely clear-cut motives. Do you think it's possible that the government of the United States of America is familiar with the fact that Iran's biggest export is oil? Oil makes up 96% of Iran's exports. And out of that 96% of Iranian oil that is exported, Japan is responsible for purchasing 12% of that Iranian oil at a whopping $12.7 billion. And those are the old statistics from the year 2007, making Japan one of the largest, if not the largest, importer of Iranian oil. And you know, it takes billions of dollars to develop a feasible nuclear program, a feasible Iranian nuclear program, which the government of the United States of America is dead serious about bringing to an abrupt stop. Do you think our government is familiar with this information that I have just shared with you? Or how about this information? In the February 25th, 2010 publication of the Tehran Times, it is stated that Iran's nuclear program will follow the Japanese model, according to Iranian Representative Ali Larijani. Then, in another notable publication, Japan Today, in June 2010, the Iranian Vice President Ali Akbar Salih is stated as saying that Iran expects Japan to fulfill its promise of helping it to build nuclear power plants. He also stated that Tokyo was so keen for nuclear cooperation with Iran, especially in the construction of new power plants, that it asked Iran not to act hastily in signing contracts with other countries. Now, if you take all of that information collectively, we have more than a substantial reason as to why the United States of America would want to perpetrate such a heinous criminal act against Japan. But that's just me pulling a wild card out of my deck. It might not mean anything whatsoever. But speaking of cards, are you familiar with the Illuminati card game? The same card game that years before it transpired was able to mysteriously predict that the Twin Towers as well as the Pentagon would be stricken by terrorist actions. Uncanny, don't you think? Well, in that same card game, there's an interesting card called Combined Disasters. And on this card called Combined Disasters, we see people dressed in what seems to be traditional Japanese garb. And then in the background, we see a clock tower. A clock tower that bears an uncanny resemblance to the Waco clock tower located in Giza of Tokyo. And if that's just not uncanny enough for you, look at the hands on the clock. The little hand is just about on the number 3. And the big hand is smack dab on the number 11. 311. Ladies and gentlemen, what you choose to do with the information that I have just shared with you, however you choose to react to all of this information, I leave that solely up to your discretion. But one thing is certain. In the Bible, in the book of Isaiah, chapter 24, starting at verse 4, we are told, "The earth languisheth and fadeth away. The world languisheth and fadeth away. The haughty people of the earth do languish. The earth is defiled under the inhabitants thereof, for they have transgressed the law, changed the ordinance, and broken the everlasting covenant." Everybody knows that the world as we now know it is rapidly fading away. Everybody has now seen a haughty people, a proud nation, a first world country, Japan, brought to its knees without a moment's notice. And whether or not you choose to believe that HAARP has anything whatsoever to do with the defiling of this earth at this time, one thing you do know for a fact is that right now in Japan, there is a radioactive chemical dumping frenzy that is taking place that is corrupting and polluting and defiling the waterways of our world. And as a result of these present activities, people all across the world, tens of millions even, are getting ready to suffer from cancer, like the common flu. And that's no joking matter. And you shouldn't be shocked or amazed at this information, because the Bible has already warned us that this would be the state of affairs that we could look forward to just minutes before the conclusion of this earth's history as we presently know it. This is what Jesus told us in the book of Matthew, chapter 24, starting at verse 7, which says, "For nation shall rise up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilence and earthquakes in diverse places." Whether you read the Bible or not, whether you believe in Jesus or not, I'm almost 100% certain that you have heard someplace by some means that just before the world comes to an end, there'll be earthquakes happening in different sectors all throughout the globe. Whether you believe in the Bible, read it or not, believe in Jesus or not, I'm almost 100% certain that you have heard that there will be pestilence, disease happening in epidemic proportions all throughout the globe just before the end of this world. And that is exactly what we see unfolding at this time right before our very eyes. And the Bible tells us in the very next verse, in Matthew 24 and verse 8, "And all these are the beginnings of sorrows." That word sorrows in the original Greek means birth pangs or labor pangs. What we're talking about here are labor contractions. In other words, all of those prophetic events are the beginning of the labor contractions. Anybody that knows anything about childbirth knows that a pregnant woman must wait until her contractions are about 5 minutes apart until she can truly expect for the time of her unborn child to be delivered. And Jesus has given us this astounding, object lesson from human nature to superimpose it on these prophetic events, that we might have a guide to help us know as to when the time of the deliverance of God's people is near at hand. When we see these prophetic events, like earthquakes and pestilence, happening rapidly one behind the other, we may know for a surety that the time of the appearance of Jesus Christ for him to deliver his people is at hand. And ladies and gentlemen, we are going to need Jesus to deliver us. Why? The Bible tells us in the very next verse why we're going to need deliverance, in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 9, which says, "And then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and they shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake." It never says here, Jesus never says there, "And then shall I rapture you out of the world so that you experience no suffering, so that you don't have to go through the tribulation." The Bible doesn't say that because Jesus never said that. What Jesus said, who has all truth, who is our master and our king, what he said is that then shall ye be afflicted, then shall they kill you, then shall ye be hated of all nations for my name's sake, because by faith you are walking in obedience to all of my commandments. That's what's going to happen. And in that time of tribulation, Jesus will come to deliver his people. But are you preparing so that Jesus can deliver you from that time? Only those who are grabbing hold of the power of the Spirit of God to separate from their sins and to live a life of righteousness, a life that reflects the beauty of Jesus Christ, will be prepared for that time. But the majority of us, we're not preparing. We're not even thinking about preparation. Most of us won't even begin to think of the thought of preparation until calamity, like a ferocious monster, comes kicking into our bedroom and pushing us off of our mattresses of self-deception so that we wake up. Are you going to wake up? In this time of preparation, what are you going to do? You know what most people are doing? The Bible tells us in the book of Isaiah chapter 23, starting at verse 12, which says, "And in that day the Lord God of hosts called for weeping and mourning, for baldness of head and girding of sackcloth, and behold, slaying of oxen, killing of sheep, eating of flesh, and drinking of wine. Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die." Do you know what God was telling us in those two scriptures? What he was saying here is that in the time in which he himself is calling for humanity to repent from our sins, to turn away from our adultery, to turn away from our fornication, to give up our lying, our stealing, our cheating, to give up our homosexuality, to give up our masturbation, our drug abuse, our alcohol abuse, to give up our gossiping, to turn away from every hereditary and cultivated tendency to sin, to repent from these evils. In that time, instead of doing this, most people are saying, "Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. Let's live a prosperous lifestyle. We need to be happy in this world. We got to occupy until he comes, you know. Let's get bigger houses, more fancy cars. Let's get a bigger screen TV than the big screen, flat screen TV that's already on my big wall, so that I can have a bigger casket to die in." That's what people are doing right now. Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die.